recognized Dutch neuroanatomists that include Nota and Kuipers, and he really brought two milestones in the history of neuroanatomy. One is the human central nervous system, which I understand has been translated in many languages, including Japanese, and I don't know who corrected the proofs of the Japanese versions. He speaks many languages, but I'm curious to know who corrected. And of course the 3 volumes, Central Nervous Systems of Vertebrates, another milestone. So it's a great pleasure to have Professor Nieuwenhuys. He will give lectures, and then he will give us some time for questions after this lecture. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with saying that it is a real great pleasure, and that I thank Dr. Cataney for his introduction. And there's one remarkable thing. Dr. Cataney and I were already close friends at the moment that we'd never seen each other. That's not. The second thing I want to say is that I'm very grateful to lecture here in London. And London is, as everybody knows, the very center of the British Empire. Now, there is a lot of talk about the British Empire, that it is not what it used to be, and that sort of things. But I'm far from all that. But I'm not going to lecture about the British Empire, however relevant that would be, but great. And I hope you can be am I looking away? And I invite you to behold the human brain. You see that for the most part, the brain is extremely large, extremely grown out, and that underneath that surface there is a center, not a center like a knot, but a center like a sheet, and that extends underneath that surface all the way. And you can see only 1/3 of that center, because more or about 2/3 is in the depth, is hidden in the depth. So you can understand what a tremendous outgrowth this is. Now, there are some people, as for instance Professor Bannister, who claim that this very brain is the crown of the creation. And other people, like Professor Nicholson, who are sitting there, would say it's the most highly organized and the most complex structure in the known universe. Anyway, it's tremendously grown out organ. And the next one. And if we put that into perspective, and we go a bit into embryology, then in the brain of an embryo of 1 month, it's small. There is a sort of primordium of all this, but it is only very small, accentuating that outgrowth. And if we go into comparative neuroanatomy, and we take the most primitive and the most simple animal that's living right now, extant, the lamprey, then we can indicate the olfactory center. We have that too, sitting here, quite long, and we can indicate the equivalent, the homologue, of the cerebral hemisphere. But it's tiny, it's even smaller than the olfactory bulb, and again, you see the enormous outgrowth of that telencephalon. So, the first point is there has been a tremendous expansion of that forebrain. But it's not only expansion, it's also differentiation, which means that different functions can localize in different structures. Now, and this is the very core of the matter, take home message number 1, that there is expansion, red arrow, but that there is also in that superficial layer that we call cortex, a differentiation. And now, there is a concept saying that it's possible in that cortex to indicate the limited entities, here in black, structural entities that are at the same time functional entities. So, functional and structural fundamental entities. And the story of that doctrine or thesis or theory goes over 3 centuries. So, it's not a tale of 2 cities, it's a tale of 3 centuries. And the first chapter is written at the beginning of the 19th century by Austrian anatomists by the name of Gall and Spurzheim, and they claimed that you can divide the cortex. About the structure of the cortex, they had no idea whatsoever, but nevertheless, they said there are 35 sharply delimited faculties in the cortex. Destructiveness, ideality, tune, spirituality, hope, maternal love, and all that. How did they know that? They claimed that centers, as I mentioned, are differentiated, have a different size, and that when a center of the cortex is strongly developed, it effects a bump in the skull. And so, by palpating the skull, you can see what the person is. So, let me palpate your skull, and I tell who you are. Mentally, spiritually, intellectually, and all that. That was their theory. It was weakly founded, although it's important that during the first decades of the 19th century, phrenology was a real science. It had journals and societies and all that. But as happens so frequently, it must have been preceded already for ages. Here we see the god of wisdom and longevity as pictured around 900 in China, and you see that the god of that has an immense bump. So they knew in China already that real wisdom is sitting here in the frontal lobe. So that was the first chapter. The second one, okay, just some illustrations. You can see that in the cortex there, friendship and all that. It's just a sort of predecessor of what we call now the social brain. Next one. And here then, a century later, Brodmann, I come to that, Brodmann had published a famous map saying that the surface of the cortex can be divided into about 44 fields or areas. 44 sharply delimited fields. Now, somewhat later, there was a clinical neurologist in Germany by the name of Karl Kleist, and he had, after the First World War, more than 300 cases of local brain injuries that he could study. And he summarized all his findings in a single map. Of course, I show only the lateral side, the medial side too. And he claimed to be able to place a word, or a few words, in all of the fields of program. Acoustic awareness, sentiment, motor skill, name understanding, and all that. So, and the book is like this, and he summarized it just in 2 pictures, as you see here. And now we are in the present in the fMRI. There's here in London a department of fMRI science. Now, and you know, of course, that by letting people do certain activities, you get local activities, bold signals, here and here and here, and in all of these experiments you can attach names to the activity connected with that or that or that local activity. If it's true that we can call the activity of course good time phrenology, then we have to name the activity of Carl Kleist neophrenology, and then of course here in the present 2014 we are in the area of ultra neophrenology, saying that is true. There are sharply delimited areas and you can attach a functional meaning to them. Next one. Okay. Now, around 1900, there was a young married couple, Oscar Vogt, Cécile Vogt, she was French, and they phrased a research program that lasted until 1970. So 70 years, these people and other people, my collaborators, were working on that program. And that program was again, just as the heart of the matter, but down, let us subdivide the cortex into structural entities. Yeah? Now, when they began that work on the cortex in 1900, they had not to start right from the zero. It was known already by the work of Cajal and many others that the cortex has many types of neurons. And another neuroanatomist, who was also a practicing psychiatrist, a combination that happens to the present day, he claimed that you can distinguish layers in the cortex, and that the fibers are also ordered and, for instance, are forming columns. So that was what the Vogts knew already when they started. And here, there was already in 1900 mainly clinical evidence that that localization of function is there and can be specified. Well, we know now, of course, this is the primary visual cortex. This is Wernicke's area, Broca's area, primary auditory cortex, etc. So that was that zero level, that was the starting point. But now, they have a principle. But that's not enough. You also have to develop an approach. How are we going to tackle the problem? And that was which histological techniques are we going to select for our program. Now, there was, I showed already a picture of Golgi preparations, but that was not at all usable because they wanted to have reliable staining procedures, easily recognized features that could be seen already at low magnification, and they selected two things to do called cytoarchitecture and myeloarchitecture. I'm going to explain what that means. The two staining procedures they selected are in the very essence simplifiers. What's a simplifier? It is a means to make things so simple that they are manageable, that you can do something with that. And that's why they selected the Nissl stain, shown here. And as you can see, the Nissl stain deprives cells of that dendritic tree deprive neurons of their axons. So all the things with which they communicate are removed. It's of course absolutely criminal to do that. But, well, you have to do something in sometimes. And so simplification to pictures like that, called cytoarchitecture. And the other stain is even going one step farther. It doesn't show neurons at all, but the axons of neurons, at least of many neurons, happen to be surrounded by myelin sheath. This greatly increases the velocity of conduction, but that was absolutely unknown about 1900. And so you can show how are these myelin sheath, and that is myeloarchitecture. Next one. And next one. Yeah. And here is Vogt. And we would say, being here in London, oh, that's the German school of architectonics. But in German, that's different. There it is. Die hohe Schule der strengen deutschen architektonischen Erforschung des Gehirns, meine Damen und Herren. Yeah? And they even had a special verb for that. Feldern. Feldert, gefeldert, and even durchfeldern, to field. So, to study these fields, ich habe die ganze frontale Rinde durchgefeldert, und das hat mir 3 Jahre gekostet. That means I studied the entire frontal lobe, and it's taken 3 years. That was now that typical ultra German school of Oscar Vogt. Okay, now, just a side step, it is remarkable that the cortex is functioning. I would say, oh, that's a bit self-evident, that all that is sitting there for just nothing. That's not very probable. But the strange thing is, it functions, and you would say it functions or it doesn't function, but because of the baffling intricacy of the cortex, we have so far as the functioning and the structure is concerned, 3 levels of resolution. 3 levels of resolution. The first level is that of the individual neurons, and those are absolutely discrete. Everybody knows these neurons exist. Those are the 2 and only really 2 units in the cortex and in the nervous system at all. And we can discuss at that level the function. We can describe the potentials, the excitatory potential, and the inhibitory potential, and the transmitters they use, and the receptors there are, and we can have a long story at that level of resolution. There is a second level of resolution, that is mesocircuitry, about little problems that would be present in the cortex. Well, I'm not going to say anything about that, but I have my thoughts about that. And then there is the third level, and that's the level of day, of this afternoon. That's the architectonic, that's the level of resolution of these fields, cytoarchitectonic, of myeloarchitectonic, and that's the relevance of a meeting of this afternoon, that this level of resolution, this one, highly relevant today. Why? For the simple reason that we have now fMRI, that we have bullet signals, and that if we want to do a decent piece of research, we have to say where that activity is. Architectonics, and there is even a straightforward height nowadays, and that's about the connectome, the total of connections in the brain, as epitomized in ways like this. And there too, the questions come up, what is the relation with the architectonics? So there are 2 issues of direct relevance attached to this and attached to the architecture. Yeah, now, there was another principle in the starting point of the Vogts, And that was division of labor. When you have a big project, it's good to say, here's a map. And they entrusted the whole cytoarchitectonics, this, to Broadman. And he was tremendously productive. And in the 8 years between 1900 and 1999, he published a large number of papers and map. And this is the world, as I showed, in which Broadman lived for 9 years. Not neurons, but highly simplified neurons brought back to just dots of various shapes and density. Now, and here is then that famous map of Broadman, and here is Broadman himself. Well, let's have a closer look at the map. Yeah. So, published in 1909, and now being an icon of the neurosciences, reproduced hundreds of times in all textbooks. Everybody knows the map of Broadman. 44 fields. In the map, all borders are sharp, but in the text, nobody has read the text. It's actually a whole book. He claims that several fields do not have sharp boundaries. Some fields, especially here and here, go readily over into each other. He noticed that there is inter-individual variation. So, for instance, area 17, the primary visual cortex, can be much larger than here or much smaller, but he didn't show that in the single map. And, as I said, this map, or rather its three-dimensional version, is up to the present the standard reference for, let's say, the MRI world. So, we are now here, cytoarchitecture, map of Broadman, but that didn't remain confined to Germany. Other people thought that initial state is very easy to do. We're going to do that too. We're going to make a map too. And there were several people who made a map. And here you see these maps. Follicular Koskinas, 107 areas. Bailey and von Bonen in America, only 8 areas, and they claim that when you start here in the parietal cortex, you go down to the temporal cortex, and you go all the way up here, and then to the frontal cortex. You never pass any border. That's all homogeneous, only 8 fields. And then finally, a Russian map, Sarkisov, and that is to be considered as a somewhat varied version of this map. Yeah, but even beyond 1970, cytoarchitecture proceeded, and there is nowadays a school in Germany, the Harmon School, and they're still doing cytoarchitectonics. However, they do it in what they consider a more sophisticated way. They do it observer independently. For instance, they measure the gray level index going through this cortex like this and that and that. And you can see here it's very dense, so you get here a peak, and so you get a profile, and here you get another profile. And in this way, and not by simply looking through the microscope, they made that map. And they also use, but I'm not going into details about that, receptor architectonics. It's now possible, this immunochemistry or optical radiography, to specifically stain the receptor complexes for certain neurotransmitters. You can visualize them. They can also base an architecture on that, and they use a combination of these two things to come, finally, that's their aim, to a map. But they work now for over 20 years, and they're about halfway, because it's very cumbersome, very laborious, very tedious. Yes, and so, as a summary, the neocortex is divisible into juxtaposed areas of fields, different number of fields, discussion about sharpness, some borders confirmed by observer-independent studies, but there is the idea, precisely because of that enormous difference in the number of fields detected, that is not entirely reliable. Nevertheless, that Roadman map is still widely used in the MRI world. Okay, so we have done on this, but what happened now on the other side, the myeloarchitecture? Here, Roadman worked very hard and had his map in 1909. But what was that Vogt doing? I'm not saying that he was doing nothing at all, but he had made a tremendous miscalculation. That's at least my impression. He had tremendously underestimated the difficulties of doing myeloarchitectonics. Here are samples of the myeloarchitectonics. That is the distribution of myelinated fibers within the cortex. And you see they're concentrated into horizontal tangential layers. And notice that, because at the very end of my lecture, I will emphasize that, so everybody stop, okay? Look at these bones, radii. And he saw these two things, and he had no idea what these fibers are doing, but that was none of his concern. His only thing was he wanted to make a certification. And he thought there are four main types. But when he was going on with working and working, he couldn't do with these four types. He had to add further particulars and further, and he ended up with 80 new terms. And when that happens, people are going to say, that's it. When he once made a lecture on this and was explaining that somebody in the audience shouted, "Poor students!" Meaning, oh, you have to learn all these particulars. And that made myeloarchitectonics so as to become a rather esoteric business. They thought, very strange, so many things, so many terms. No. Nevertheless, in 1910 and in 1911, Vogt brought out his first papers. Here is the frontal lobe, lateral side, medial side, parietal lobe, lateral side, medial side. And just as Roadman, he came up with a map. However, he had much more fields than Roadman has. Roadman, the whole cortex, 44 fields, and he, having done only the frontal cortex and the parietal cortex, had already 96. And that was another thing. So many fields, 40 fields, that it sounds reasonable. This is 6 fields, this is odd. Okay. Yeah. And here then, he shows once again in 1919, a sample of various fields, and it obviously shows that these are all different, you can see that. But here, in shorthand, he wrote here all the particulars, you see, so very complex and therefore not very popular. And he had many collaborators, he confined himself to the frontal lobe and to the parietal lobe, and then he stopped. He had many other things to do, but he had many, many collaborators, and he did once again the frontal lobe, and once again the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, insula. It was all done, and one of these, by the name of Hopp, that was the last myeloarchitectonist, he tried to make it quantitative and observer independent, so he was measuring the density. We go from here to here, and you can see that increases, of course, and there are little humps corresponding to the stripes of Panerget. So, and this man, he really contributed substantially to myeloarchitectonics. And the next one. Yeah. Oh. And, well, my name is not down here, but when I was reading all of these papers. Well, I can read German very well, but it was still a tremendous amount of work. No one had hardly ever paid any attention to it. But I went through all of that, and I wrote a review summarizing that amount of literature into just 50 pages. And my conclusion was, they've seen all parts of the cortex, and there are 70, 30, 19, 60, there are in total 185 areas, but strange enough, there is no map. They had done all the parts, but the map was lacking. Okay. In the meantime, something else happened. There was no map, because Vogt was still there, and he still was the director of the school, Russian director. And little by little, he developed a concept. He didn't phrase it himself, but by reading all of these papers, some of the 500 pages, I isolated that concept out of all of these wordy papers, and that can be summarized as follows. The human cerebral cortex is composed of about 200 distinct areas which represent fundamental, structural, and functional units. That was what he said, but the English-speaking world was disregarding that almost totally. But those who had taken the trouble to take some knowledge of it had the following comments: misleading and insignificant, to be regarded with great suspicion, fantastic, or out of all proportions. So, yeah. So, if we now take that whole Vogt school, that as I said, it existed for 70 years, and if I epitomize that now, you can say on the one hand, there was a very positive product in 1999, and that was the Brodmann's map, now an icon of neuroanatomy. And on the other hand, on the side of the myeloarchitecture, many studies, competent workers, no map, and all of the studies fell into obscurity, and that whole story about 200 areas was absolutely rejected. Yeah? However, if we study now the recent literature on the cortex, and I don't have time to explain all the pieces of evidence, but they are for the people that are interested in the review. I spelled it out all. Then the conclusion is fully justified that there is converging quantitative psychoarchitectonic, receptor-architectonic, myeloarchitectonic, pathological, as well as functional evidence indicating that this concept is essentially correct. This concept and that the number of these areas is 200. Okay. And I said at the end of the article, yeah, okay, we skip this one. And I said, if all of this is true, then it's worthwhile to make a map, meta-analytic map, of all the data that are available, but that have never been integrated into a single map. So what we actually want to do is, and that's now the work of Dr. Brewer and Dr. Saliani, who's sitting there and there, those are my collaborators on this project, to complete the work of the Van Vogt school, to pass this border, and to bring that in the whole discussion of the architecture, because, and that was one of the theses of Vogt, there is no myeloarchitecture, there's no cytoarchitecture, there's only a simple thing, and that's the architecture of the cortex. So no matter whether you do cytoarchitecture or myeloarchitecture, finally you will find a single subdivision of the cortex indicating the only two structural, functional units on models. And so, and that's what we're aiming for, and we hope that at a certain moment this point can be attained, and that there will be a single unified architecture. Yeah? Now, to make that map, and as I said, I did it in collaboration with Kate Brewer and Dr. Saliani, that was a tremendous amount of work. We had to do all of this, and we go quickly through. To give you an impression, 4 people had studied the frontal lobe. This is the frontal lobe of the human brain, all seen in the lateral view, so here. But you see that these look different. Because of course they use different brains, that's right. But nevertheless, the difference is substantial. And we had to converge all of the data we have, of course, into a single template, and so we did. Right? And so we had to select a template brain, and we did this, and Leonardo decided that this would be the best thing to take the brain template as again one of the Montreal Neurological Institute. And we made these pictures, we made them of all sides of the brain, indicating the various lobes of the brain, the most important sulci, and the most important drive. That was our standard brain, and once having defined the standard brain, the second step was, of course, to bring all the data in that brain. So, now, how did we proceed? Now, I give one example, and that's the medial side of the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is here, and if I cut now the brain to half, and you look from the inside, then you get the medial aspect of the parietal lobe. Now, and here are the 3 maps we had, but you see already are tremendous differences. This one, the anterior posterior, is half of that here, and of that here. And that is not so. Even if I take 1,000 brains, I don't tend to image the parietal lobe as only half of the length of another one. But we have to take the matter we had, that's in the meta-analysis, and then this is the corresponding map of our standard brain, same here and here, and we projected these data on our standard brain by applying simple one-to-one topological transformations in which we use existing computer programs, and that was mainly the work case good. Yes, next one. Now, if we superimpose the three sets of findings then, we got this, and that looks rather complicated, but if we single out now individual fields, it happens to be possible to get an average map. It looks pretty nicely. And that one. And here you see how we proceeded in case of single fields. The dotted lines in color represent the individual findings, and the shaded area is the average area we deduced from this data. And by doing that for the entire cortex, that is to make more than 20 of these local transformations. Yeah. And here you see, to give an example, how here's a medial view of the standard brain. And here the big commissure, the corpus callosum. And what we did then, with the aid of computer transformations, we took the map, for instance, this is the map of the same area, and we modeled it around that corpus callosum and matched it in our standard brain. Yeah? The next one. And here then is our new map. It has 180 fields. Lateral view, yeah. Medial view, yeah. Upper and lower view, then. And that is now meta-analytical standard map of the human cortex based on the four faults. Yes? Yeah. And so, there's now a new map. It has 180, but one less than originally planned. And the numbering of both, we went up to 96. We simply extended that over the whole cortex, so that all the areas have now a single number. Yes? Well, about an evaluation of the new map, we have to admit, and that's, for Dr. Fitches, that is not so good, but I'm sorry for that. But areas 17 and 18 are not included for the simple reason that we had no data. These Foxcall did everything, but not mapping broken areas 17 and 18. And so at that point, our map is unfortunately incomplete. The second thing is that it shows only the exposed part of the cortex and not the cortex that is in the folds. But in that respect, it's not worse nor better than any other map. Well, it's largely based on qualitative data. And another important point, the interhemispheric and the inter-individual variation that is there, beyond any doubt, that is not included in the map. Yeah. Okay. And then finally then, what made this map, now this new map, having more than 4 times as many fields as Brodmann's has, what is the potential meaning of our map? Now, the first thing, and that's quite simple, one of the intention of us, one of the reasons to do it, it was a tribute to all of these people who worked years and years, and it had never come to a map, so it was pretty complete. And that was one. But the map may also be important for the interpretation of functional MRI pictures. I think that it would be feasible if people in a 3-dimensional version of a map that's now underway, we're working on a 3-dimensional version of this map, would use the numbers we gave to indicate the areas of activation. I think that could be done. But the other important, potentially important thing of the map might well be that now we go higher and higher up with the Teslas, and such is now possible. I myself, no doubt about that, I'm an absolute zero Tesla man. Zero Tesla. But more and more Teslas, and that means, as most of you know, we should agree, that we can do now structural MRI. That is to say, we can look into the cortex to structural features. And the ideal would be that you have a person, put him in the scanner, and say to him, let's say, make a calculation of that kind, and in the meantime, we will vary the activity, where is the bones here. That's there. Then we stop with the experiment. Now we're going to do structural MRI, and that's so high, and the level of resolution is so good that we can detect structural features of the cortex. Now that would be, of course, a tremendous step forward, because then we could say, we first look at the function, and then we look at the structure. Now, and then we can see whether they coincide or not, and the whole problem is solved. But not that far yet. However, if we can do this, what I now describe, that chance, that study of the myelinated fibers will be detectable much higher than that we could do that with cell bodies. So we do the bet on myeloarchitecture. Now, if that is possible, and people are trying out that already, then of course it would be very nice to have a map and to compare whether these findings of the structural MRI, focusing on fiber connections, or on fiber pictures, would fit with our map. Okay. That's it. But now the final point. Okay. Yeah, and that's about the connectome. Everybody has seen pictures like that. They've been on the cover of all leading journals. And why is that so? Why is that so? And only one reason, that's spectacular. That's very nice connectome. They give nice stories that are down in living great. What are these people? But that pictures really show very little answer, very little. Why? Because a connectome is something indicating what is connected. That's the connectome, of course. But these connectomes become very vague as they approach the cortex, which is here. They end in no man's land. So as the cortex is concerned, there are not connectomes. Now, but then we get pictures of this type. And that's a sort of simplification of this. Everybody knows these pictures, saying, here are all of these connections. Well, here and so on. And here, there are these white dots. In the literature, those are the nodes and the hubs. The node issues a node, and the hub is where many connections converge. But when you ask them, where are these nodes? Where are these hubs? They are in the cortex. Where are they in the cortex? Yeah, they are in the cortex. Next one. Final one. The thing is that these all are pseudo-connectomes. There are not real connectomes. We have to be fair and honest about that. Why is that so? That is because these connectomes, and it's a handmade drawing by the author himself, showing these connections, And so far as the subcortical connections are concerned, they're fine. And so far as portraying main fiber streams in the white center of the brain, they're fine. But they are not showing the connections with the cortex for the simple reason that they don't enter into the cortex. And so, this was the first take-home message. Now comes the second. In order to make real progress in this highly intricate matter, we have to find a means to extend the connectome, was here, into the cortex, to make continuity between these white matter bundles into the cortex. Is that possible? Theoretically, it's altogether possible, because in that whole approach of Vogt and Vogt, we have these radial bundles, and these radial bundles are, so far as the afferent events are concerned, nothing but the cortical extensions of the connectomes of these connectomes. So, and that's the end of the story, in one way or another, we have to find out how can we connect the high resolution fMRI that is coming with these fiber patterns into the cortex. That would be a real step forward. And to come.
Thank you very much. A lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of challenging questions. So, any questions, Professor Nieuwenhuys? Perhaps the most seniors can start.
Yes, that's a question.
Because I'm very deaf, I always approach it, not to kill him, but only to listen.
Yes, intimidation won't get you anywhere. So there is an implication here that differences in structure represent differences in function, and also the converse, that different functions will have manifestly different structures. But I would claim that is an assumption. How much of an assumption is it, do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good. I'm always pondering about that, because some people consider me as a sort of late disciple of Vogt, whose only task is to revive that holiday. That is not so. That's not so. But I'm sure that what these people have found, and I showed it in many pictures, is really there. So that these 180 fields is not fantasy, they are there. But the question, and is it so then, that these 180 fields represent 180 discrete functions, that's open. That was for Vogt the highest truth. That's what he said throughout his life. These entities are structural and functional units. And in many areas of the cortex, and it's the kind of visual, I'm inclined to say yes. But about the other fields, I don't know. However, it is intriguing that when you do fMRI, well, we know, of course, all the tricks they do in order to get these bold signals. They are this leveling and just 10% more than the other. Nevertheless, they are localized. But that's why I said, there was another level in my talk. You had phrenologists, neophrenologists, And nowadays, with an ultra neophrenologist, to give an example, would it be ready, could we go home, if we now would take the 180 fields of this map and try to write function indicating names in all of these 180 and say, okay, we go home, it's all over? Or would it be only the very beginning? Or would it be totally misleading? Or should we design a totally different algorithm to talk about cortex in terms of chains of connections and in terms of patterns of connections and all that? If we are going to say what I'm saying now, there are some people here in the audience who presumably want to do that, then I would say you are absolutely right. Yet, whatever network you come up with, you have to specify what the nodal points in your network are. And otherwise, it's all hypothetical talk.
My question is about the relationship between the Brodmann map and the Vogt map. So can you have...
Oh, I'm very happy that you can answer this question very clearly.
Can you have...
I can't tell you how it is, but I can say you precisely what Vogt thought. Huh? His collaborator had made that map, cytoarchitectonics, 44 fields. Huh? Vogt had never made a total map, but he was absolutely sure. He actually wrote an obituary for Brodmann in 1919, but he said there, faithfully, Brodmann had missed many, many boundaries. And he also said, Vogt said himself, I did combine cyto and myeloarchitecture, and wherever I looked, there was perfect coincidence between the cyto and the myeloarchitecture. So that difference, according to Vogt, did not exist.
Can I just add that Brodmann, he didn't believe on functional localization.
I want to comment on that. Yes, Brodmann believed in functional localization. However, he was inclined to believe that when it comes to higher cognitive functions, it is not single areas, but many areas that are involved in that function. And that was interesting. I showed that map of Kleist. It was, of course, ironic that Kleist did something with the map of Brodmann that was not Brodmann-like. Yes.
Michel?
Do you think in the future, if we have better tools to look at the myeloarchitecture, we'll have even more areas?
The number of very relevant questions is here in the center of the British Empire significantly higher than another place. Of course, that's out of the project.
He's from France. He's from France.
That point was now one of our points of concern. Why? Because many of the people we used for our meta-analysis went further than delineating areas. They also saw what they called sub-areas. And so they claimed that the whole postulation of the cortex is still much finer than on 180. But the reason why we didn't consider that was, first of all, because the project had to come to an end. That was not a good argument. But the second thing is, if you look at that level of resolution, then these various authors were not coherent. One did it in this way, and another one found another. So that blurred the whole thing, and so we decided practically to stay at the level of areas. But whether this will be the end or again only the beginning.
You have other questions? Sorry.
Lots of things, but just one thing. The Vogt and the Brodmann suppositions are that the structural details at the histological level reflect some attribute or other of that particular area. I suppose you see that in terms of microcircuitry or something else. What is your view of what this represents actually in terms of functional functional circuitry perhaps, or inputs, outputs, all those things? Yeah.
Again, yeah. Right. Now, as I said, Brodmann looked all his life to Nissl preparations, and only that. And so he could see nothing of connections, and so he didn't mention connections, but he said that the cortex was subdivided into structural and functional areas, and he called these entities organs. He said the cortex has many organs, and Vogt echoed that. But of course, these people had ideas that there are connections and interconnections and the whole thing, but that work doesn't give direct evidence in how they want to proceed